Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Young from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, and I'm going to be talking about a specific usability issue we might run into when we're developing for VR. So we've seen a big interest in using VR for education recently. There's been a lot of papers, especially in the last couple of years post-pandemic, and just a couple of examples here. So on the left here, we've got a system for teaching students how to put together circuit diagrams using pre-made blocks. And on the right, we've got a system for teaching geology students how to perform some measurements out in the field. And we'll be looking at the second example a bit more closely, but first we just need a bit of context. So when geologists are out in the field, they want to measure rocks. Funnily enough, that's kind of their job. And there's two measurements that they're looking for in particular for a start. So first of all, we have the strike, which is the horizontal angle of the rock relative to north. And to get this, we line our compass up with the rock. We get some components all aligned, and then we read this number here on the center of the dial on the compass. And we've also got the dipping angle, which is the vertical angle that the rock is formed in relative to a horizontal plane. So again, we take a compass, we line it up with the rock, we align some other components, and then we read this very small number on the inside of the dial there to get the right value. So the problem is that the tools we're using for this are quite small. So even in the real world, it can be quite hard to read. But if you put this into VR, where we've got a lower resolution and the fixed focal length of most modern displays, it could be quite hard to get these readings. So here you can see that the specific line we're looking at is only really about the width of a human hair, so it's really hard to replicate in virtual reality. And so you can see here how that might look in VR. So we've got the compass here, and you can see all those little lines around the outside there. That's what we're trying to read. And even if we get quite close to it, even on the high resolution stream here, that's quite hard to read. And it's also not just a reading issue, it's also trying to align those components in the first place. So these are all quite small. Again, they're slightly bigger than what we're trying to read off, but it's still trying to align very small parts in very precise ways to get the right readings out of them. And as far as I know, that's not really something that's been looked at a lot in the past. So the only real example I could find is from a couple of years ago, the Magorama system. So they use the example of teaching medical students. So you take a 3D model and you can specify a specific part of it, and then you enlarge it to make it easier to see and annotate on top of. So I wanted to investigate how we could make these small components and these small bits of text easier to read and interact with in a virtual environment. So I developed three ways that we could potentially do this. So first of all, we take a problem area. In this case, it's the dial that we need to be rotating and reading off of. And when the user selects it, the dial just expands in place to make it a bit more readable. But then the obvious problem is that if it's just expanding where it is, we're going to have clipping issues with the geometry. And if it's just the dial we're expanding, it might cover up other parts of the compass we might want to read off as well. So we'd have to design this very carefully to make sure that we're not covering up parts of the environment or the tools that we might want to see later. The second one is we still use the enlargement idea, but instead of enlarging the compass in place, we create a separate replica that always hovers over the object and mirrors any manipulations made to it. So you can see here, as that dial is rotating, the expanded version does as well. So in this way, we have the larger version, which is easy to read off, but it's not obscuring the environment or the object's relation to the environment. And the third one is that we just do the work for the user. So we decide that reading the compass is too hard, we just do it for them, and we just show the proper reading as a big readout. So you can see as the compass is changing, that value on the compass is changing as well. And you might have saw at the start if we're holding the compass horizontally, we assume they want a strike reading. If they hold it vertically, we assume they want a dip reading. And we can kind of predict the user's intentions based on that. So I ran a user study comparing these three methods to a compass with no augmentations at all. And we had three questions. So do any of these augmentations increase the usability of the tool at all? Does manipulating the tool in unrealistic ways decrease the sense of spatial presence within the environment? And then still looking at the education use case, if we make the tools less realistic, does it make it harder for the students to then take the skills they learned in the virtual environment and apply it to the real world? So we had 46 participants. It was kind of uneven between conditions. This is run during the tail end of the pandemic, so it was kind of hard to get participants. But almost all of them had never seen this exercise done before, and most of them had prior experience with virtual reality. So they performed two tasks. So first of all, they went through that virtual tutorial you've been seeing in the previous videos. And then after they'd done that, they tried to replicate the lesson they just learned in the real world, in this case on this wooden podium you can see on the side here. And the first thing we noticed immediately is that people in the text condition where the reading was done for them could complete the virtual tutorial significantly faster than in the other conditions, and that there wasn't a difference between the other conditions. This is probably not too surprising because they don't have to kind of bend it and try and make these readings and try to interpret the values on the compass. But then the other obvious thing is that if we're doing the reading for them, then they might not be learning the skills that they need to really. And a lot of the participants in the text condition said this. They felt that they were just blindly relying on what was on the compass. They weren't trying to figure out how these values were obtained at all. They just kind of assumed that was the right thing and carried on. Subsequently, people in the text condition, when they tried to replicate the task in the real world, they required significantly more help than in some of the other conditions. So you can see here the difference between the text and the growth condition, that was significant. And there was also a weaker relationship between the text and the guide conditions, which it was there before bond for any correction, but yeah, it was close. But then, funnily enough, even though they needed more help from the study mediator to finish the task, they all felt kind of equally as confident in completing it. So we didn't find any significant difference between conditions, but that might just be because of the low participant counts. We're not quite sure. And also, we didn't see any difference in how long it took participants to finish that real-world task. So even though they're asking for help more frequently, and they might have, had a bit of a harder time with it, it didn't really seem to affect how long it took them. We also didn't really see any differences in the spatial presence, the perceived workload, or the usability of each of the conditions. Again, we didn't have many participants for this just because we're still kind of in the tail end of the pandemic and it was hard to get people. But what we did see was quite a lot of comments from the participants kind of reinforcing the need for this research. So almost everyone in the control condition had quite a hard time finishing the virtual task. Some of them didn't really finish it at all. They kind of ended up just giving up and just choosing an answer in the multi-choice questions. And my favorite comment from them was, one of them just straight up said maybe have some kind of magnification in the scenario, because they felt trying to read those tiny values without any kind of magnification was quite difficult. So what have we learned? So even though we didn't see many significant results from our study, the participant comments we got kind of verified that there might be some scenarios where we really do need to provide some kind of help in using these small tools if we want to replicate them as faithfully as we can. So if we're doing this, then doing the work for the user might be the easiest solution, because we saw participants finishing their virtual task significantly faster if they just had the answers given to them. But then obviously, if this is an educational scenario, that might not be the best way of doing things. We might have to make the user struggle a little bit to make sure they're learning what they need to be. And overall, I think the main takeaway from this is that there's definitely further research required in this space. So again, we're seeing a lot more educational use cases for virtual reality at the moment, and we're going to start running into a lot of these issues. We've got very small parts we're trying to interact with. So thank you very much for watching.